the big question to me really comes down to what the stock market's going to do, right? Because I look at what Bitcoin is now. Bitcoin is becoming more and more widely accepted. Institutions are getting more and more interested. We see that from the spot ETF filings that we've seen. So the only negative is if it's a risk off scenario where we see a big risk off in the stock market that, let's say the NASDAQ dropped 20-30%, then it probably bleeds into crypto and causes Bitcoin to drop back to those lows or go lower. Again, I think my worst case scenario would be that 9 to 10K level.
During a recent interview with Crypto Banter, expert trader Gareth Soloway mentioned that the sole downside for Bitcoin would arise in the event of a risk-off scenario, characterized by a significant downturn in the stock market. During a period marked by a banking crisis, Bitcoin's trading price hovered around $20,000. Subsequently, it experienced a surge, reaching approximately $31,000. Another pivotal point was observed when Bitcoin dipped to roughly $25,000, a value that held substantial significance, coinciding with the time when BlackRock's ETF filing took place. Following this occurrence, Bitcoin hit a 2023 high of $31,809 on July 13th, but has struggled to reclaim its $30,000 level since July 24th. It traded near two-month lows around $26,000. Every low point in Bitcoin's history carries significance. Coupled with other Bitcoin experts, Gareth Soloway hold the belief that there will be heightened interest in Bitcoin following the filing of the ETF. On Tuesday, the court sided with Grayscale in a lawsuit against the Securities and Exchange Commission, which had denied the company's application to convert the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust to an ETF. Bitcoin surged near $27,900 Tuesday after the court decision. Soloway mentioned that the only bad thing for Bitcoin is if the NASDAQ falls by a big amount, like 20% to 30%. If that happens, it could affect cryptocurrencies too, making Bitcoin's price go down to the range of $9,000 to $10,000. Stocks moved higher for a third consecutive session, cutting into major indexes' August losses with broad-based gains. The NASDAQ Composite climbed more than 1% Tuesday, as investors flocked back to tech stocks in the final days of what's been a difficult August for the market. During the interview, Soloway mentioned that if the NASDAQ goes back to its previous lows as in October, he believes that Bitcoin could also drop to lows of around 15,705 to 15,500. Let's direct our attention towards the few clips from interview.
I'm in agreement that the low could be in. I mean, it's all probability based, but we're following the exact trend. There's usually a little bit more check back to that previous low or close to it. The big question to me really comes down to what the stock market's going to do, right? Because I look at what Bitcoin is now. Bitcoin is becoming more and more widely accepted. Institutions are getting more and more interested. We see that from the spot ETF filings that we've seen. So there's a lot of positives. The only negative for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's not caught up in the securities regulation stuff. We know that from the SEC. So the only negative is if it's a risk off scenario where we see a big risk off in the stock market that, let's say the NASDAQ dropped 20-30%, then it probably bleeds into crypto and causes Bitcoin to drop back to those lows or go lower. Again, I think my worst case scenario would be that 9 to 10K level. I look at Max Payne where people would just totally throw up their hands in the air and say, I quit. It's probably if we broke that level. But I only think that happens if we get that big stock market collapse. So other than that, I think you start to, look at key levels. Like I have a $25,000 level, which was where the BlackRock news came out about the spot ETF. We were at 25, and then we got that 31. And then if we break 25, you have to look at 20. 20 was where Silicon Valley Bank failed, and we saw the big pop in crypto because of that, or the big pop in Bitcoin because of that. So those are two key psychological levels, 25 and 20. And then again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat it each as a level, like that. It's support until it's broken. Once it's broken, then the next level support. If that gets broken, then the lows could be tested. But as a technician, that's how we have to treat it, right? We can't assume anything. The charts have to guide us to that. NASDAQ we've seen have a pretty substantial rally. It came within about 10% of its all-time highs. I think it's worth noting that even though Bitcoin doubled from its lows, it never came within 10 or 20 or even 30% of its previous all-time highs. So even though it was a great bounce on Bitcoin, relative to the NASDAQ, it actually underperformed in that way. Now, if the NASDAQ were to just go back to, in my opinion, if the NASDAQ just revisits your October lows, which is around 10,000, that would be about a 30% drop in the NASDAQ from here.
Wow.
I think we see the 15,700, 15,500 lows again on Bitcoin. If we break that and we start testing some of these lower trend lines down here where we get sub 10,000, that's where you probably get down to that 10,000 marker on Bitcoin. So, I mean, in other words, to see that big of a drop in the NASDAQ, things really have to get screwed up in the economy and in the global economy. So there's maybe not a huge chance of that, but that would be your worst case scenario.
As Bitcoin experiences a period of uncertainty marked by downturns and price corrections, investors are focusing on altcoins for potential opportunities. Among the all altcoins, Litecoin gained more attention. Interest in Litecoin has risen in 2023 as it built towards its latest halving. On August 2nd, the amount of Litecoins available to its miners went down by 50% in a bid to keep the price up. In the past 30 days, the price of Litecoin has experienced a downward trend, dropping nearly 30% since its halving event. Soloway is pinpointing support levels with the goal of a bounce back to approximately $75. During the interview, Soloway provided valuable trading advice. He said the idea of slow and steady wins the race serves as a guiding principle. Let's direct our attention towards the few clips from interview.
You don't want to sell after a major collapse because inevitably you'll get some sort of bounce. Now, the question is, when you get that bounce, do you then use your logic and say, okay, I got the bounce that I was thinking I was going to get, and do I exit, or do you then get greedy and say, oh, well, if it bounced this much, maybe it can go this much and this much and this much? And that's the tricky thing, is that we're always dealing with those inner emotions, which can kind of make us do the wrong thing at the wrong time. So for me, I'm actually been nibbling on a few of the altcoins down here. Polygon, Litecoin, actually. So this is the Litecoin chart, right? And we know that they had their kind of halving over here. It had that big run into it. And then we've really, I mean, this is a tremendous drop from $115 down to about $60, about a 50% drop. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at supports right here and maybe a retrace bounce back to 75. Now, I only start, and this is how I trade to kind of mitigate my own emotions, is I only have a tiny position on that. I think it's 3% of my portfolio. So if it goes down to this level, I'll pick up a little bit more. I'll dollar cost average. And if it goes here, I'll dollar cost average. At one of these levels, you'll get a big bounce. And then you have to be ready once you're in the money to say, okay, I got my bounce, wherever it may be, and I'll take it off the table. So at least on a trader's mentality, that's how you have to be. You have to be nimble. You always want to leave yourself the ability to maneuver. In fact, I think it's one of the most overlooked things in trading is people go in and they go in so heavy that they can't trade around their core position. And then you get yourself in a position where it goes lower and there's nothing you can do about it. You just start hoping and praying that you're going to get a bounce. But what I do is I go in small so that inevitably I'll be wrong a fair amount. I can maneuver in at lower levels. And when I do get that bounce at one of those points, it puts me back to break even or in the money. I take a little bit off. I let that core position continue to run. If it keeps running, I take a little bit off again. If it comes back in, I can buy back in again. And so it becomes much more of a dance with a trading setup. And I think that's super, super important to do versus going all in. Yeah, you might make $1 million if you hit the exact low, but I can tell you from experience that happens less often than the opposite. And so you have to really be realistic. It's all about taking it. The slower you take it, the more wealth you're going to build. And I think that was the changing point in my career where I would go too heavy on trades and I get smoked and I blow up my account. And I blew my account up multiple times in my early years. I mean, multiple times. And finally it sunk in. And I found that when I traded less and I actually looked and just used the chart, but took as much emotion as I could out of the trade, my results were better. And again, it was slow and steady wins the race.
In his tweet, Soloway said Bitcoin remains below support at 28K. Probability suggests it still needs to test 25K. If that doesn't hold, 20K comes quickly. With neither bulls nor bears asserting dominance, Bitcoin is trading close to its lowest point in 2 months at approximately $26,000. Earlier, on Tuesday, Bitcoin experienced a surge, reaching around $27,900. How do you perceive the potential for the ongoing Bitcoin hype to eventually reach a saturation point? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this information valuable, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel to stay informed with the latest news and videos. Thanks for joining us.